The flashing red and blue lights in the rearview mirror were completely unprovoked. Officer Harlan Crow thought he had just pulled over another out-of-place driver in his affluent, predominantly white town. He smirked, fully intending to humiliate the man behind the wheel of the brand new Mercedes. He mocked the driver's claims of being a lawyer, laughing at his expensive suit and degree, but Officer Crow was about to learn a career-ending lesson. The man he was illegally detaining was the newly sworn-in state attorney general. The clock on the dashboard of the midnight blue Mercedes S-Class read nearly midnight. Elias Thorne let out a long, slow breath, rolling his broad shoulders against the pristine leather of the driver's seat. It had been a grueling stretch of days, at the pinnacle of a long career in public service, after years of prosecuting corrupt officials, fighting against systemic injustice in the lower courts, and serving as a relentless district attorney. He had just been sworn in as the state attorney general. The transition had been a whirlwind of press conferences, endless bureaucratic meetings, and a mountain of backlogged case files left by his predecessor. Tonight, all Elias wanted was the quiet sanctuary of his own home. He was driving through the town of Crestview, a notoriously wealthy, manicured suburb that bordered the state capital. Crestview was the kind of town where the property taxes were exorbitant, the neighborhood watch was overly zealous, and the local police department operated like a private security force for the country club elite. Elias knew Crestview's reputation well. During his time as a civil rights litigator earlier in his career, he had received multiple complaints about the Crestview Police Department's habit of racially profiling drivers who passed through their pristine streets. The streetlights cast rhythmic, sweeping shadows across Elias's face as he drove strictly at the speed limit. He was wearing a charcoal custom-tailored suit, though his tie was loosened and his collar unbuttoned. Beside him on the passenger seat sat a heavy scuffed leather briefcase bulging with confidential state documents. Elias was a mile away from the interstate on-ramp when the shadows behind him were suddenly violently fractured by the strobe of police lights. Red and blue violently illuminated the interior of the Mercedes. Elias glanced in his rearview mirror. A Crestview police cruiser was riding his bumper aggressively close. Elias didn't panic. He didn't swerve. A cold, familiar numbness washed over him. It was a feeling he had known since he was a teenager, driving his mother's beat-up sedan in the city. No matter how many degrees he held, no matter how much authority he wielded in the courtroom, in the dead of night, illuminated by the harsh glare of police sirens, he was stripped of his titles. He was just a black man in a very expensive car in a neighborhood where some people believed he didn't belong. Methodically, Elias engaged his turn signal. He bypassed a dark, narrow shoulder and drove an additional distance to pull into the well-lit parking lot of a closed pharmacy. It was a habit born of survival. Always pull over where there is light and ideally cameras. He placed the Mercedes in park, turned off the engine, and rolled down all four windows. This was another calculated move to show complete transparency. He placed both of his large hands at the 10 and 2 positions on the steering wheel. He waited. In the side mirror, Elias watched the heavy door of the police cruiser swing open. Out stepped Officer Harlan Crow. Crow was a hulking man, a veteran of the Crestview force who wore his uniform slightly too tight to emphasize his chest. He walked with a slow, exaggerated swagger, his hand casually resting on the butt of his service weapon. Crow had spent years in a town where the biggest crimes were teenagers stealing golf carts and housewives driving under the influence of prescription pills, yet he carried himself like a soldier in a war zone. Behind Crow, the passenger door opened and a much younger, thinner officer stepped out. This was Officer Riley Grant, a rookie who had been on the force recently. Grant looked nervous. Hanging back by the cruiser's headlights, holding a large heavy-duty flashlight, Crow approached the driver's side of the Mercedes. He didn't go to the window immediately. Instead, he stopped at the trunk, deliberately pressing his thumb against the tail light to leave a fingerprint. An old-school cop tactic, just in case the driver fled and killed him. He shone his blinding tactical flashlight directly into the side mirror, intending to blind the driver before stepping up to Elias's window. "Evening," Crow said. The word dragged out, dripping with a condescending drawl. He kept the blinding beam of the flashlight pointed directly at Elias's eyes. "Good evening, officer," Elias replied. His voice was a deep, calm baritone. It was the exact voice he used when cross-examining a hostile witness, unshaken, unbothered. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" Crow asked, leaning in slightly. He was invading the physical space of the window, his eyes darting around the luxurious interior of the vehicle, taking in the ambient lighting, the pristine leather, and the expensive briefcase. "I have absolutely no idea, officer," Elias said smoothly, blinking against the harsh light. "I was maintaining the speed limit, my registration is current, and all my lights are functioning. Perhaps you could illuminate me." Crow let out a short, humorless chuckle. He didn't like the vocabulary. He didn't like the tone. Most drivers, especially minorities, pulled over in Crestview were stammering, nervous, or immediately defensive. Elias was sitting there as if he were holding court. You failed to maintain your lane, Crow lied without missing a beat. You crossed the solid yellow line back by the Elm Street intersection. I did not, Elias stated simply. It wasn't an argument, it was a statement of objective fact. I maintained a steady lane, but if you feel a citation is necessary, I will gladly accept it and address it in court. Crow's jaw tightened. License, registration, and proof of insurance. My wallet is in my inside left suit jacket pocket, Elias narrated his movements clearly and slowly. My registration and insurance are in the glove compartment. I am going to reach for my wallet first. Just get the ID, buddy, and let's not make any sudden moves, Crow sneered, his hand gripping his duty belt. Elias slowly reached into his jacket and retrieved his leather wallet. He pulled out his standard state driver's license. He had not yet received his newly minted Attorney General credentials, which were still being processed by the state security office, but his standard license was perfectly valid. He handed it to Crow. Crow snatched it out of his hand, shining the flashlight onto the plastic card. He read the name. Elias Thorne. Thorne, Crow muttered. He looked from the ID to Elias, then back to the ID. This your car, Thorne? It is. A brand new S-Class, Crow noted, his voice laced with heavy skepticism. This runs what? 130 grand? You must have a pretty good job, Thorne. What is it you do? I work for the state, Elias answered neutrally. He wasn't going to play his hand yet. He wanted to see exactly how far Crow was willing to take this violation of protocol. The state? Crow let out a loud barking laugh. What? You drive a bus or are you a chauffeur? Because usually when I see a guy like you in a car like this, he's either driving his boss around or he borrowed it without asking. Elias's grip on the steering wheel tightened just a fraction of an inch, the leather creaking softly under his knuckles. The racial implication was entirely unveiled. I can assure you, officer, the vehicle belongs to me. If you run the plates, you will see it is registered in my name, Elias said, his voice dropping an octave, carrying the lethal chill of a coming storm. Crow didn't like the chill in Elias's voice. Cops like Crow thrived on fear. They fed on the anxiety of the people they subjugated. When a citizen refused to be intimidated, it felt like an attack on Crow's very identity. Crow tapped the driver's license against his chin. You know, Thorne, there's been a string of burglaries in the upscale neighborhoods around here. High-end electronics, jewelry, and you're out here driving through a town you don't live in at midnight. I am traveling home from my office in the capital, Elias said, his eyes locking onto Crow's. Is it a crime in Crestview to utilize public roads after sunset? Don't get smart with me, boy, Crow snapped, the word boy cracking like a whip in the cold night air. Elias went completely still. In his mind, a very precise, very unforgiving file was being opened. Officer Harlan Crow was no longer just an annoyance, he was a liability to the badge he wore. And Elias was the chief law enforcement officer of the entire state. Officer, Elias said, his tone dangerously polite, I highly recommend you maintain a professional demeanor. Step out of the car, Crow ordered immediately, taking a step back and unhooking the safety strap on his holster. From the back of the cruiser, the young rookie Grant jogged forward. Sarge, everything okay? Get over to the passenger side, Grant. Keep an eye on him, Crow barked. I told you to step out of the vehicle, Thorne. Under Pennsylvania versus Mims, you do have the authority to order me out of the vehicle during a lawful traffic stop, Elias recited flawlessly, referencing the Supreme Court case. However, I will note for the record that this stop is predicated on a fabricated traffic violation, and your subsequent line of questioning implies a baseless investigatory detention entirely devoid of reasonable, articulable suspicion. Crow paused, his eyes narrowing. The legal jargon hit him like a physical blow, momentarily short-circuiting his aggression. What the hell are you babbling about? Elias smoothly opened his door and stepped out into the night air. Standing at well over 6 feet, he was taller than Crow, and in his impeccably tailored suit, he cut an imposing figure. He calmly closed the car door behind him and crossed his arms over his chest. I am not babbling, officer. I am explicitly stating my rights, Elias said, looking down slightly at the officer. Crow puffed out his chest, stepping into Elias's personal space to intimidate him. You think you're some kind of lawyer? I am an attorney, yes, Elias replied. Crow let out a loud, ugly laugh, turning to his rookie. You hear that, Grant? We got ourselves a lawyer. Johnny Cochran over here. He turned back to Elias, a vicious smirk on his face. Where'd you get your law degree, Thorne? Printed off the internet? One of those online universities where you pay $100 and they mail you a certificate? Let me guess, you do slip and falls for a strip mall firm. I received my Juris Doctorate from Columbia Law School, Elias answered. Graduated magna cum laude. Right, and I'm the King of England, Crow mocked. He shone his flashlight down at Elias's hands, then at his pockets. You got any weapons on you? Any needles? Any drugs? I am unarmed. I do not use narcotics, Elias said. Put your hands on the hood of the car, Crow commanded. Are you conducting a Terry frisk? Elias asked, not moving. Because to do so, you must have a reasonable suspicion that I am armed and presently dangerous. Given that I have been nothing but compliant and have identified myself as an officer of the court, you have no such suspicion. I have suspicion that you're resisting my lawful orders, Crow shouted, his face turning red. Hands on the hood now, or I will put you on the ground and place you in handcuffs. Across the hood, Officer Grant looked terrified. Sarge, maybe we should just run his license and give him a warning. He's not doing anything. Shut up, Grant, Crow snapped. This guy is a smart aleck who thinks his fancy vocabulary means he doesn't have to listen to the police. Hands on the hood. Elias considered his options. He could end this right now. He could simply state his title, but Elias knew something crucial. If Crow was doing this to him, he was doing it to teenagers. He was doing it to single mothers. He was doing it to people who didn't have Columbia law degrees and the power of the state behind them. Elias needed to see the full extent of Crow's corruption. He needed Crow to dig his grave so deep he could never climb out. Slowly, deliberately, Elias turned and placed his hands flat on the hood of his own car. Crow smirked triumphantly. He stepped up behind Elias and kicked his legs apart roughly. Crow's hands moved over Elias's suit, patting him down with unnecessary force. He checked the waistline, the ankles, and the pockets. Crow pulled out Elias's cell phone and set it on the hood. Then he patted the right side of the jacket and felt something rigid. He reached his hand inside Elias's suit jacket. "Do not reach into my pockets," Elias warned, his voice like grinding granite. "A Terry frisk only allows for a pat-down of the outer clothing to check for weapons. You do not have probable cause to search my interior pockets." "I feel a hard object. Could be a weapon," Crow lied again, shoving his hand into Elias's inner pocket. He pulled it out. It wasn't a weapon. It was a thick, heavy leather badge wallet. Crow didn't open it immediately. He just stared at the fine leather, flipping it over in his hand. "What's this, Thorne? You got a fake badge in here? You playing dress up?" "That is my official identification," Elias said, his hand still resting on the hood. "I strongly suggest you open it and read it very, very carefully." The parking lot of the pharmacy was dead quiet, save for the low, rhythmic hum of the police cruiser's engine and the distant sound of highway traffic. The strobe lights washed over the three men, casting an eerie, pulsating glow. Officer Grant, standing on the other side of the Mercedes, swallowed hard. His instincts were screaming at him that something was terribly wrong. The man they had pulled over wasn't acting like a criminal caught in a lie. He was acting like a predator, allowing a trap to snap shut around its prey. "Open it, Sarge!" Grant called out, his voice shaking. "Just look at the ID!" Crow sneered at Grant. "Relax, rookie. This guy's a fraud. I've seen it 100 times. These sovereign citizen types are guys who buy fake private investigator badges to try and get out of speeding tickets." Crow looked back at Elias's broad back. "Let me tell you something, counselor. Impersonating a law enforcement officer or a state official is a felony. So if I open this up and it's some fake tin star you bought on Amazon, you aren't just getting a ticket. You're going to the county jail, and this shiny car of yours is getting impounded. Do you understand me?" "I understand the law perfectly, Officer Crow," Elias said, having read the officer's name tag when he was facing him. "The question is, do you? Because in the last 10 minutes, you have violated the Fourth Amendment. You have conducted an illegal search of my person under the false pretext of a Terry stop, and you are currently threatening me with false imprisonment. I am giving you one final opportunity to hand me back my property. Write whatever fabricated citation you wish to write, and let me go." It was an out, a massive, generous out that Elias was offering, but ego is a blinding poison. Crow had ruled the asphalt of Crestview for too long to let a black man in a fancy suit dictate terms to him. "You don't give me opportunities, boy," Crow growled, stepping closer, his breath hot on the back of Elias's neck. "I am the law out here, and you are just another thug who got lucky with a paycheck." Elias slowly lifted his hands from the hood of the car and turned around to face Crow. He ignored Crow's hand hovering over his gun. "Open the wallet, Richard," Elias commanded. It wasn't a request. The booming authority in Elias's voice was the exact tone he used to command a courtroom, a tone that had caused hardened cartel bosses and corrupt politicians to sweat on the witness stand. Crow blinked, momentarily taken aback by the sheer, unadulterated power radiating from the man. For a fraction of a second, doubt crept into Crow's mind. He looked down at the heavy leather wallet in his left hand. It felt expensive. The stitching was flawless. Slowly, Crow flipped it open. The first thing that caught the flashing police lights was the gold. It was a heavy, brilliantly polished shield, far larger and more intricate than a standard police badge. The state seal was emblazoned perfectly in the center, surrounded by deeply engraved, unmistakable black lettering. Below the badge, behind a clear plastic window, was a newly minted high-security state identification card. It bore Elias's stern face, and beneath his photo, printed in bold, undeniable text, were the words that would end Harlan Crow's career. "Elias Thorne, Attorney General, State Department of Justice." Crow stopped breathing. The silence that fell between them was absolute. The cicadas in the nearby trees seemed to stop chirping. The wind died down. The only sound was the heavy thud of Crow's heart hammering against his ribs. His eyes darted from the gold shield to the ID card, desperately looking for a typo, a watermark error, anything that would indicate it was a forgery. But it was flawless. It bore the holographic seal of the governor's office. "Sarge!" Officer Grant called out nervously from the passenger side. "Sarge, what does it say? Who is he?" Crow couldn't speak. His throat had constricted, dry as sand. The arrogant sneer had completely melted off his face, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of pure, unadulterated terror. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving him looking sickly pale in the flashing blue lights. He slowly looked up from the wallet, his eyes meeting Elias's. Elias stood perfectly still, his posture impeccable. The quiet, polite demeanor he had maintained since the beginning of the stop was gone. In its place was the cold, calculating presence of the state's highest-ranking law enforcement official. "You are asking about my law degree, officer," Elias said, his voice quiet but echoing like thunder in Crow's ears. "I did indeed graduate from Columbia, and my current job, the one you assumed involved driving someone else's car, involves overseeing every single police department, district attorney, and law enforcement agency in this state, including the Crestview Police Department." Crow opened his mouth to speak, but only a pathetic, raspy squeak came out. His hand trembled, making the gold shield in the wallet catch the light and flash in his eyes. Elias took a single step forward. Crow instinctively took a step back, shrinking under the towering presence of the Attorney General. "Officer Grant!" Elias called out, his eyes never leaving Crow's terrified face. Grant jumped, startled by the direct address. "Yes, sir?" "Come here and look at this identification, officer," Elias instructed. Grant hurried around the front of the Mercedes, his footsteps heavy on the pavement. He walked up beside his paralyzed sergeant and looked down at the wallet in Crow's trembling hand. Grant squinted in the dim light, reading the badge. His eyes widened comically. He looked at the ID picture, then at Elias, then back to the badge. "Oh my God," Grant whispered, his voice trembling. He immediately took 3 large steps backward, physically distancing himself from Crow, as if the sergeant was suddenly radioactive. "Sir, Attorney General Thorne, I had no idea, sir." "I am aware of that, Officer Grant," Elias said, keeping his gaze locked on Crow. "Your sergeant here decided to initiate a traffic stop without probable cause. He then lied about a traffic violation, illegally detained me, verbally abused me with racially charged language, and conducted an illegal search of my person, all while you stood by and watched." Grant looked like he was about to vomit. "Sir, I'm just a rookie. He's my training officer." "I know," Elias said smoothly, "which is why you are currently in a position to salvage your own career, depending entirely on what happens in the next few minutes." Elias finally reached out and smoothly plucked his wallet from Crow's loose, shaking grip. He tucked it back into his breast pocket. "Officer Crow," Elias said, saying the name like it was a disease. "You asked me earlier if I knew why you pulled me over. I believe I have the answer now." Officer Crow's world was crumbling in real time. The humid night air suddenly felt thick, suffocating, as if all the oxygen had been vacuumed out of the deserted pharmacy parking lot. The flashing strobe of the red and blue lights, usually a symbol of his absolute authority, now felt like the harsh glare of an interrogation room. Crow tried to speak, but his tongue felt like a block of lead. "Sir, Attorney General Thorne," he stammered, his voice an octave higher than it had been a moment ago. This is a massive misunderstanding, a terrible misunderstanding. I thought you matched the description of a suspect we've been looking for." "A suspect?" Elias Thorne repeated, his voice dangerously calm. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "A suspect in a string of high-end burglaries, as you claimed earlier. Describe this suspect to me, officer. What was the height, the weight, the vehicle make and model? And do not lie to me, because tomorrow morning I will have my deputies audit every dispatch log and BOLO alert issued by your department in the last several months." Crow swallowed, a drop of cold sweat tracing a path down his thick neck. He knew the game was up. He was a black male, sir, driving a luxury sedan. "So your articulable reasonable suspicion for pulling me over, detaining me, and threatening me with felony charges was that I am a black man in a Mercedes," Elias stated, stripping away the thin veneer of police jargon to expose the raw, undeniable racism beneath. "You didn't see me cross the yellow line. You didn't smell drugs. You saw a black man in an expensive car, and your immediate assumption was that I was either a criminal, a chauffeur, or a fraud." Crow held up his hands in a placating gesture, completely abandoning his tough guy persona. "No, sir, not at all. We have to be thorough out here in Crestview. We have a duty to the residents. It was just a routine check. Professional courtesy, right? Cop to cop." Elias's eyes narrowed into terrifying slits. Do not ever equate yourself to me, officer, and do not insult my intelligence by calling this a routine check. You remind me of a case I prosecuted back in my time as a district attorney, a dirty detective named Gregory Matthews in the 6th Precinct. He also thought a badge shielded him from federal civil rights laws. He used the exact same thoroughness excuse when he was caught planting evidence. Matthews is currently serving time in a federal penitentiary. Do you know who put him there, Richard? Crow's knees physically wobbled. He knew the Matthews case. Every cop in the state knew it. It was the case that had made Elias Thorne famous, earning him the nickname the Iron Prosecutor. You did, sir, Crow whispered, his spirit entirely broken. Exactly, Elias said. He turned his attention to the young rookie standing by the cruiser's bumper. Officer Grant? Grant snapped to attention, looking like a deer in headlights. Yes, Attorney General. Is your Axon body camera currently recording? Elias asked. Grant looked down at his chest. The small black device had a glowing red ring around the lens. Yes, sir. It's been recording since we initiated the stop. Audio and video. Elias turned back to Crow. He looked at the sergeant's chest. The camera was there, but there was no red light. Yours is turned off, Officer Crow. A convenient mechanical failure or a deliberate violation of departmental policy during a traffic stop. The battery was dying, sir, Crow lied, though his voice cracked on the final word. Officer Grant, Elias commanded, go to your cruiser, secure the dashcam footage, do not let it overwrite, do not turn it off, and do not let Officer Crow anywhere near that vehicle. Understood? Understood, sir, Grant said, scrambling backward to the cruiser and practically diving into the passenger seat to guard the dashcam. Elias reached into his tailored pants pocket and pulled out his cell phone. The screen illuminated his stern features. He scrolled through his contacts, bypassing the governor and the state senators, and tapped a number. He put the phone on speaker, holding it out so Crow could hear every ring. It was past midnight. The line rang 3 times before a groggy, deep voice answered. Henderson, Chief Marcus Harlan. Marcus, this is State Attorney General Elias Thorne, Elias said clearly. There was a loud rustling on the other end of the line, the sound of a man practically falling out of bed. Attorney General, sir, good Lord, what time is it? Is there an emergency? There is a significant situation, Marcus, Elias said, keeping his eyes locked on the sweating, pale face of Officer Crow. I am currently standing in the closed pharmacy parking lot on Elm Street right here in Crestview. I am being detained by 2 of your officers. Detained? Chief Harlan's voice shot up in panic. Sir, you've been detained by my men for what? That is exactly the question I've been asking Officer Harlan Crow, Elias replied. He pulled me over under the fabricated pretense of a lane violation. He then mocked my profession, demanded I step out of the vehicle without lawful justification, illegally patted me down, and threatened me with jail time. I believe he was fully prepared to arrest me until he illegally searched my breast pocket and found my Attorney General badge. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the phone line. When Chief Harlan finally spoke, he sounded breathless. Sir, please tell me you are joking. I do not joke about the 4th Amendment, Chief, Elias said coldly. And I certainly do not joke about your officers treating the citizens of this state like second-class subjects. I want you down here now. I am leaving my house this second, sir. A few minutes, please, Attorney General Thorne. Just hold tight. I will handle this. The line clicked dead. Elias lowered his phone and slid it back into his pocket. He looked at Crow, who was now visibly trembling, his chest heaving as he gasped for air. The arrogant predator from minutes ago had been completely erased, replaced by a terrified man realizing his career, his pension, and his freedom were disintegrating before his eyes. Sir, please, Crow begged, taking a step forward. I have years on the force. I have a wife. I have 2 kids in college. If I lose this job, I lose my pension. I lose everything. It was a mistake. Just let me write you a warning and we can all go home, please, sir. You should have thought of your family before you violated your oath, Crow, Elias replied, his voice devoid of any sympathy. Did you think about the families of the young men you've terrorized on this stretch of road? Did you think about their futures when you slapped handcuffs on them for driving through your town? Elias turned his back on the pleading officer, walking calmly toward the passenger side of his Mercedes. He opened the door and reached inside, grasping the handle of his scuffed leather briefcase. He hoisted it out, placed it gently on the roof of his car, and snapped the brass locks open. You see, Richard, Elias said without looking up, rummaging through the neat stacks of legal documents, tonight wasn't just a random encounter. It's funny how fate works, isn't it? Crow frowned, confusion mixing with his terror. What do you mean, sir? Minutes later, the screech of tires shattered the suburban quiet. An unmarked black Ford Explorer vaulted over the curb of the pharmacy parking lot, coming to a violent halt behind the police cruiser. The driver's door flew open and Chief Marcus Harlan scrambled out. Harlan was a man who usually prided himself on his immaculate public appearance. Tonight, he was a mess. He was wearing pajama pants tucked into unlaced combat boots with a Crestview PD windbreaker thrown haphazardly over a white undershirt. He was red-faced, panting, and sweating profusely. He practically sprinted past Officer Grant, who was standing at rigid attention by the cruiser, and marched directly up to Officer Crow. Before Crow could even open his mouth to explain, Chief Harlan shoved him backward by the chest. "Shut your mouth, Crow," Harlan roared, his voice echoing off the brick walls of the pharmacy. "Don't say a single damn word. Hand me your sidearm, now." "Chief, please," Crow pleaded. "Your weapon, Harlan," Chief Harlan barked. With shaking hands, Crow unholstered his Glock 19 and handed it over handle first. Harlan snatched it, then pointed a trembling finger at the curb. "Go sit on the curb. Do not move. Do not speak." Crow, thoroughly broken, slumped over to the concrete curb and sat down, burying his face in his hands. Chief Harlan took a deep breath, trying to compose himself, and turned to face Elias Thorne. The Attorney General was leaning casually against the side of his Mercedes, his hands in his pockets, the open leather briefcase resting on the roof beside him. Attorney General Thorne, Harlan said, his voice dropping to an incredibly respectful, almost begging tone. He walked forward, extending a hand. "Sir, I cannot begin to apologize for this. This is an absolute disgrace, I promise you. Officer Crow will be suspended without pay immediately. Pending a full internal affairs investigation, he will be stripped of his badge." Elias did not take the chief's hand. He simply stared at it until Harlan awkwardly lowered it to his side. "An internal affairs investigation, Marcus?" Elias asked, his tone mild but laced with razor-sharp intent. "You want to handle this in-house? You think sweeping one bad apple under the rug is going to solve my problem with the Crestview Police Department?" Harlan blanched. "Sir, Crow is a rogue officer. He acted entirely outside of departmental policy." "Stop lying to me, Marcus," Elias cut in, his voice cracking like a whip. He reached into his open briefcase and pulled out a thick, heavily tabbed manila folder. He tossed it onto the hood of his Mercedes. It landed with a heavy, authoritative thud. Harlan stared at the folder. "What is that, sir?" "For the last several months," Elias began, his voice taking on the rhythmic, commanding cadence of a prosecutor laying out a closing argument. "Long before I was sworn in as Attorney General, I was operating as the lead district attorney for this district. During that time, my office began receiving a highly disproportionate number of complaints regarding racial profiling, illegal searches, and civil rights violations stemming from traffic stops in Crestview." Harlan's eyes widened. He looked from the folder to Elias, suddenly realizing the ground beneath him was crumbling. "We brought in the State Civil Rights Enforcement Division," Elias continued. "Under the direction of Special Prosecutor Marcus Grant, we began quietly pulling your department's traffic data. The numbers were staggering, Marcus. African American and Hispanic drivers account for barely 12% of the traffic traveling through Crestview, yet they account for the vast majority of your midnight shift traffic stops and the overwhelming majority of your vehicle searches." "Sir, statistics can be misconstrued," Harlan tried to interject, though he sounded weak. "We patrol a high-traffic corridor." "I am not finished," Elias snapped, silencing the chief instantly. "We didn't just look at statistics, we looked at the why. We subpoenaed internal emails. We interviewed former officers who were forced out for not playing ball. We discovered that your department operates an unwritten quota and containment policy. You explicitly instruct your night shift officers to pull over minorities driving expensive vehicles under the pretext of looking for burglary suspects. You incentivize it." Harlan's face lost all its color. He looked like a man who had just been handed a terminal diagnosis. "Attorney General, you can't possibly believe I sanctioned—" Harlan tried to interject. "I know you sanctioned it, Marcus," Elias said coldly. "We have the sworn testimonies. We have the data. The only thing my office was lacking before I took my new oath was indisputable, first-hand, high-definition evidence of this policy being executed in real time by one of your senior training officers without any extenuating circumstances." Elias gestured to the open, pristine parking lot, to Crow sitting on the curb, to the flashing lights. "Which brings me to tonight," Elias said, a grim, satisfied smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The realization hit Chief Harlan like a physical blow. He staggered back half a step. Down on the curb, Crow lifted his head, his jaw dropping as the pieces clicked together. "You didn't just happen to get pulled over," Harlan whispered, horrified. "No, I did not," Elias confirmed. "I have an apartment in the capital. I could have stayed there tonight, but instead I chose to drive my brand new S-Class through the heart of Crestview at midnight, going exactly the speed limit. I made myself the bait. I wanted to see if your officers were truly as brazen as the investigation suggested." Elias pointed a finger at Crow. "And Officer Crow here performed exactly as predicted. He took the bait hook, line, and sinker. He lied about a traffic violation. He mocked my education. He illegally detained me. And thankfully, Officer Grant's body body camera and the cruiser's dash cam captured every single unconstitutional second of it. Chief Harlan rubbed his face with both hands, letting out a long, defeated groan. He was looking at federal indictments. He was looking at a complete Department of Justice takeover of his police force. So, Chief Harlan, Elias said, closing his briefcase with a sharp, decisive click, we are not going to do an internal affairs investigation because as of this moment, the Crestview Police Department is under a sweeping civil rights probe by the State Attorney General's office. Officer Crow is not going to be suspended. He is going to be arrested. Arrested? Crow cried out from the curb, scrambling to his feet. Sir, you can't... Chief, tell him. Under Section 242 of Title 18, Elias recited, his voice echoing in the night. Deprivation of rights under color of law, it is a federal crime. He looked at the chief. Marcus, you are going to take your handcuffs off your belt and you are going to arrest your officer right now, or I will call the state police barracks, have them come down here and they will arrest both of you. Harlan didn't hesitate. Survival instinct kicked in. He turned to Crow, pulling his steel cuffs from the back of his belt. Hands behind your back, Harlan, Harlan ordered, his voice devoid of emotion. Chief, please, we're brothers. I was just doing what you told us to do, Crow screamed, tears finally spilling down his cheeks as he backed away. Do not make me use force, Harlan. Give me your hands, Chief Harlan demanded, stepping forward and grabbing Crow's wrist, twisting it violently behind his back. The sharp click, click, click of the ratcheting metal echoed loudly in the quiet night. Elias watched impassively as the veteran, the arrogant bully of Crestview, was reduced to a sobbing, handcuffed mess in the middle of a pharmacy parking lot. Elias then turned his gaze to the rookie. Officer Grant was standing perfectly still, terrified to even breathe. Officer Grant, Elias said. Sir, Grant squeaked. Tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, you are going to report to the State Attorney General's office in the Capitol, Elias instructed. You are going to sit down with Special Prosecutor Grant, and you are going to give a full sworn, unredacted statement about everything you have seen and heard during your time in this department. If you are entirely truthful, you will keep your badge. If you omit a single detail to protect these men, you will share a cell with them. Do we have an understanding? Grant nodded frantically. Yes, sir. Absolutely, sir. I'll tell you everything. Elias Thorne adjusted his suit jacket, picked up his briefcase, and opened the door of his Mercedes. He looked back one last time at the flashing lights, the handcuffed officer, and the ruined police chief. Good night, gentlemen, Elias said. I'll see you in court. The sun had barely crested the horizon over the state capitol, casting long golden rays against the limestone pillars of the Department of Justice building, but Attorney General Elias Thorne had already been at his desk for hours. The pristine charcoal suit from the night before had been replaced by a sharp navy pinstripe, his armor for the coming war. At exactly 8 o'clock, the heavy oak doors to Elias's office swung open. In walked Special Prosecutor Marcus Grant, flanked by FBI Special Agent Marcus Grant of the Public Corruption Unit. Trailing nervously behind them, clutching a styrofoam coffee cup as if his life depended on it, was Officer Riley Grant. Good morning, Attorney General, Grant said, setting a thick stack of fresh transcripts on Elias's desk. Officer Grant has been incredibly cooperative. He's been talking since early this morning. Elias looked up, his expression unreadable. He gestured to the plush leather chairs opposite his desk. Sit down, Officer Grant. Tell me exactly what you told Special Agent Grant. Grant swallowed hard, sinking into the chair. Sir, it's worse than just racial profiling. The stops, they weren't just about harassment. It was a revenue-generating operation. Chief Harlan and Mayor Marcus Harlan called it Operation Night Watch, off the books. They specifically targeted out-of-town minorities driving luxury vehicles because they assumed those drivers wouldn't have the local connections to fight back in Crestview's municipal court. Agent Grant leaned forward, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. It gets deeper, Elias. Grant provided us with the location of an off-site server where the department kept a secondary ledger. Crow and a handful of other senior officers were utilizing civil asset forfeiture laws to seize cash, jewelry, and sometimes the vehicles themselves, claiming they were suspected proceeds of narcotics trafficking, but there were no drugs. The Crestview municipal government was funneling that seized money into the town's general fund to pay for the new country club renovations and the mayor's re-election campaign. Elias's eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. This wasn't just a case of a few racist cops playing cowboy on a midnight shift. This was a highly organized, systemic criminal enterprise operating under the color of law. Officer Crow hadn't just been searching for a fake badge in Elias's suit. He had been searching for cash to steal. Get the warrants, Elias ordered, his voice vibrating with absolute authority. I want the Crestview Police Department locked down. I want Mayor Marcus Harlan's financial records frozen. And I want federal agents kicking down the doors of Crestview City Hall before their morning coffee gets cold. By midday, the affluent, quiet suburb of Crestview was the epicenter of a media earthquake. Satellite trucks from every major news network jammed the manicured streets. Overhead, news helicopters circled like vultures. At 1 o'clock, Attorney General Elias Thorne stepped up to the podium in the state capitol press briefing room. The blinding flash of hundreds of cameras illuminated the room as he adjusted the microphones. "Good afternoon," Elias began, his booming baritone demanding absolute silence. "Last night, I personally initiated an undercover integrity test within the jurisdiction of the Crestview Police Department. What that operation uncovered was a sickening systemic rot that reaches the highest levels of the city's leadership. As of this morning, under the joint efforts of the State Department of Justice and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Crestview Police Chief Marcus Harlan, Mayor Marcus Harlan, and Officer Harlan Crow have been placed under federal arrest." Eat. A collective gasp echoed through the press corps, followed by an immediate eruption of shouted questions. Elias held up a hand, silencing them instantly. "They are facing a multi-count indictment," Elias continued, "including conspiracy to violate civil rights, extortion under color of official right, and wire fraud. The badge is a symbol of public trust. When men like Harlan Crow and Marcus Harlan pervert that trust into a weapon of racial terror and financial extortion, they cease to be law enforcement officers. They become an organized crime syndicate, and in this state, we dismantle syndicates." Later, the sweeping architecture of the federal district court in the Capitol felt less like a building and more like a cathedral of judgment. The Honorable Judge Marcus Pierce, a man known for his merciless sentencing of corrupt officials, presided over the courtroom with a stare that could freeze boiling water. Sitting at the defense table wearing a brightly colored, ill-fitting Orange County jail jumpsuit was Officer Harlan Crow. He had aged dramatically in the span of months. His muscular frame had deflated, his broad shoulders slumped in absolute defeat. His arrogant swagger had been entirely eradicated, replaced by the hollow, terrified stare of a man who realized his life was over. The twists in the case had been rapid and devastating. Chief Marcus Harlan, terrified of dying in a federal penitentiary, had immediately turned state's witness. He had handed the prosecution everything they needed to completely destroy Mayor Marcus Harlan and Officer Harlan Crow. Harlan's testimony confirmed that Crow was the primary enforcer of Operation Nightwatch, personally responsible for hundreds of illegal searches and numerous fraudulent civil asset forfeitures. Because of the overwhelming evidence, including the damning dashcam footage of Crow mocking and illegally searching the state attorney general, Crow's defense attorneys had practically begged for a plea deal. Elias Thorne, seated at the prosecution table in a flawless gray suit, stood up as Judge Pierce called for sentencing. "Mr. Thorne, does the state wish to make a final statement?" Judge Pierce asked, adjusting his reading glasses. "We do, Your Honor," Elias replied. He walked out from behind the table and approached the podium. He didn't look at the judge. He turned his body slightly, locking his piercing gaze directly onto Harlan Crow. Crow flinched, unable to meet Elias's eyes, staring instead at his shackled hands. "Months ago," Elias's voice rang out clear and steady, "the defendant pulled me over in the dead of night. He looked at my vehicle. He looked at the color of my skin, and he made a calculation. He calculated that I was vulnerable. He calculated that because of who he was and because of the badge he wore, he could strip me of my dignity, my constitutional rights, and my freedom with absolute impunity." Elias paused, letting the silence hang heavy in the massive courtroom. "The defendant asked me where I got my law degree," Elias continued. "He mocked the very idea that a man who looked like me could hold a position of authority. But this case has never been about my title, Your Honor. It is about the hundreds of ordinary citizens who drove through Crestview and didn't have a badge of their own to protect them, the single mothers whose rent money was stolen under the guise of asset forfeiture. The young college students who were thrown against the hoods of their cars and terrorized simply for existing in a town that deemed them undesirable." Elias stepped away from the podium, stepping closer to the defense table. "Harlan Crow believed he was the law," Elias said, his voice dropping to a terrifying quiet intensity. "Today he will find out what the law actually is." Judge Pierce nodded slowly. He looked down at Crow with profound disgust. "Mr. Crow, in my decades on the bench, I have rarely seen a more brazen, vile abuse of authority. You did not protect and serve. You hunted and exploited. I am accepting the prosecution's recommendation in full." Judge Pierce struck his gavel. "Harlan Crow, you are hereby sentenced to decades in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of parole. You are remanded immediately to the custody of the United States Marshals." A choked sob escaped Crow's throat as two heavy-set federal marshals grabbed him by the arms, hauling him to his feet. As they dragged him toward the side door of the courtroom, Crow finally looked back. He looked past his expensive defense attorneys, past the crowded gallery, and met the eyes of Elias Thorne. Elias didn't smile, he didn't gloat, he simply stood perfectly straight. The ultimate embodiment of the justice Crow had spent his entire career mocking. The heavy wooden door slammed shut, sealing Crow's fate. That evening, the sun set beautifully over the state capitol. Elias Thorne walked out of the Department of Justice building, his leather briefcase in hand. The air was crisp and cool. He walked down the stone steps and approached his midnight blue Mercedes S-Class, parked in its reserved spot. He slid into the driver's seat, the familiar smell of premium leather welcoming him. He started the engine, pulling out onto the highway. As he drove home, the roads felt different. The flashing lights of a police cruiser no longer meant a predatory trap was waiting in the dark. Thanks to one midnight traffic stop, a corrupt empire had fallen, and the scales of justice had finally been balanced. What an absolute masterclass in taking down a corrupt system. Attorney General Elias Thorne didn't just get revenge, he dismantled a criminal empire operating right under the public's nose. It just goes to show that power trips and prejudice will eventually cross the wrong person. If you love watching justice serve cold to Officer Crow and the corrupt Crestview officials, please hit that like button, share this incredible true-to-life story with your friends to spread the word, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more epic stories of instant karma and legal takedowns.